you can use your headphones if you have, or maybe earphones
Oh,
that can stop your background noise.
yes, sir.
You better use that.
A very good evening to one and all present here today on the platform of iSPELL Jaipur Forum. In September, we had inaugurated our forum with blessings of iSPELL India executive members and especially Professor Hansam sir and President Ma'am Anupma Vora and other executive members of the committee. Now, after that, we already have one event last month related to graphic novels, and now this is the second monthly event we are going to conduct today. So today's event coordinator is Dr. Vishaka Chauhan ma'am. Ma'am is currently working as principal Tilak PG College, Basti, Jaipur. Ma'am has taught at Sri Bhavani Girls PG College, Jaipur for 13 years. He has also worked with the Department of English at SS Jan Subodh PG College, Jaipur for 7 years. He has organized a national conference on transforming society through literature and social movement at SS Jan Subodh PG College on September 6 to 7, 2019. She has presented papers in many national and international seminars and conferences. She has been selected as a member of faculty in the English University of Rajasthan. She is also working as a counselor for IGNOU and Kota Open University. Ma'am is a dynamic personality and always open to learn and new things. So I would like now today to invite Ma'am to take over the charge from here and to start the proceedings of the event. Because it was already a working day and I didn't know that how people have taken out some time and started on now. Mayam, please, I don't know whose song music this is. Just cross check.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, but you just mute yourself. Let Vishaka ma'am coordinate first. Then we will hand it over to you. Over to you, Vishaka ma'am.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, Shalini ma'am, for the warm introduction. Namaskar and a very good evening to all dignitaries of iSPELL, academicians present here and participants. I, Dr. Vishaka Chauhan, the coordinator of our today's event, welcome you all. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Shalini ma'am for giving me this opportunity to coordinate today's event. Here today we have with us as resource person Dr. Anupama ma'am. She is currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of English at Postgraduate Government College, Punjab University. I welcome you ma'am. I heartily welcome Dr. Parul Mishra ma'am as a chairperson. Parul ma'am is currently working with Amity University, Jaipur as a professor of English at Amity School of Languages. I welcome Mr. Mayank Kumar as a Master of Ceremonies in today's event. Mayank Kumar is a research scholar pursuing his research in English from Amity University, Rajasthan. He has presented papers in various national and international conferences. So I invite you, Mayank, to proceed the program further. Over to you, Mayank.
Before that, I would like to, just a minute, Mayank.
Yes.
I would like to welcome Dr. Payalata ma'am. She is the Joint Secretary of iSPELL India. And I think Dr. Indrani was also there, but she is due to some technical reasons she was just now. So I would like to welcome her also as an executive member of the committee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dr. Shalini. It is, in fact, the topic which has interested me, so I have logged in immediately because of that. Thank you. Looking
Yeah, yeah,
forward to a
sure,
great
ma'am. It's a pleasure to have you after a long time here.
thank you so much.
Welcome, Payal ma'am. Welcome, Indrani ma'am.
May I start?
Yeah, yeah, you can start now.
Thank you so much, Vishakha ma'am, for the warm introduction. A very good evening to all. I am Mayank Kumar. Welcome all the dignitaries, academicians, intellectuals, and professors on today's event, Literature and Society, an overview of Manipuri poetry, organized by iSPELL, Indian Society for the Promotion of English Language and Literature. Today, as a resource person, we have with us Dr. Anupma, who is currently an assistant professor at PG, Punjab University, Chandigarh. I extend warm welcome to you, ma'am. With regards, I welcome the chairperson of today's session, Dr. Paul Mishra, who is currently professor of English at MIT University, Rajasthan. Now I take the opportunity to welcome Professor G.A. Ghanshyam sir, who is General Secretary and founder of iSPELL. I also extend regards to Dr. Vishakha ma'am, who is the event coordinator of iSPELL for today's event. I also send my regards to the esteemed and focused members of iSPELL and all the dignitaries present here. Before handing this session to the resource person, let me take an opportunity to introduce the resource person. The resource person of today's session is Dr. Arupma. She is currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of English at Postgraduate Government College, Sector 46, Punjab University, Chandigarh. She has also taught at the University of Delhi for 7 years. She completed her PhD in 2016. Her research area was poetry in English, translation from India's own plays. She has also worked as a course writer for ENU for CBCS programs. Ma'am, we are all excited to listen to your session, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am. The scheme is yours.
Thank you, Ma'am. And before we begin, I want to apologize that I have a sore throat, and I've been coughing for the last few weeks. So if I have like a coughing spree or something, I apologize beforehand. And thank you so much for having me here. It's a privilege to be on this platform. And as you have already talked about my topic, I have taken a very broad, say title, so that I can cover, some of the major features of Manipuri literature and especially Manipuri poetry. And before that, sorry, before that, I am not very sure if all the people present here, if most of us are aware or have read some of the Manipuri literature or poetry. I'm not very sure, so I will take this audience as I'm thinking of taking this opportunity as an introduction to Manipuri literature, which was also part of my PhD thesis. So I'm planning to have my talk divided into few parts. So I will be taking all of you to the historical as well as the social cultural background of Manipuri literature and how Manipuri poetry has evolved over the time. And then in the later half of the talk, I will focus more on the contemporary Manipuri poetry and maybe read out if I have time, maybe I will read out few of the poems. So may I know how much time I have? Like how many minutes do I get? Mayank?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am,
over. Yeah.
around 40 to 50 minutes, or it extends, there's no problem.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much. So, I'm beginning the talk by, talking about the idea of the Northeast. So, Manipur, as in everyone knows that, it belongs to the Northeastern states, or what we call the seven and now eight sisters of the Northeastern part. So, the idea of Northeast. So, if you look at it, where is it Northeast from? So is it from, if we look at the seat of power, the capital of country, from Delhi, it is not northeast, it is eastern part of India. So why do we have, this term northeast to kind of, homogenize the entire 7, 8 states that, is divided from the mainland India by what we call the chicken neck. And if you look at the geographical map, the physical map of India, the entire northeastern part is connected to the mainland India by a very small strip of land near, I think, Bihar. So what we call the chicken neck. So where is it? From what point is it northeast? So it goes back to the colonial era, in the colonial period when the capital, or say the power, was in Kolkata. So from Kolkata, it was considered to be the northeastern frontiers. So from that term, northeast came to being, say, like the Middle East. So we also call Middle East. From what point is the Middle East? From India, it is west, right? So the northeast. I wanted to clarify that northeast again is a term that came from the colonial period, where we talk of the northeastern frontier. And when we talk about the Northeast, we tend to homogenize the entire 7 8 states as something similar, maybe racially or maybe culturally. So if you look at it, it is diverse. So much diversity in that area. Leave the Northeast. I'm going to talk about Manipur. In Manipur itself, we have so much of diversity. Now, when I talk about Manipuri literature, the talk, or say the title or the topic of my talk today, I'm talking about Manipuri literature. I'm focusing on the Meitei communities. There are so many communities there with different linguistic background, different culture, different religion. So I will be focusing on only one part, one community from the entire diversity that is the Northeast. So the literature that I'm going to talk about is of the Maitri community, from which I also belong to the Maitri community. And if some of you are familiar with the people of this place, Maitri community is the majority in Manipur. So in Manipur, we can broadly divide the people into, say, the valley people and the hill people. So Manipur is a state where we have hills surrounding a valley. So most of the Meitei people, they are in the valley, and there are different tribes inhabiting the hill. So broadly, we divide that into hill people and the valley people. So if you look at it, as I said earlier, that I will be taking all of you to the historical, the evolution of poetry. So I'll be talking in phases, the poetry in phases, in a period of time. Say, for example, the first phase that I'm going to talk about is from the earliest recorded, literature till the early 18th century. Now, if you look at it, most of the tribal communities, most of the communities in India, ancient, early, older communities, we have this oral tradition. So Manipur, very interestingly, we have this oral tradition script simultaneously, existing, and it is, let me tell you that very few communities in the northeastern India has their own script and their own written language. So except for, I think, Assamese and Tripura and Manipur, all the other parts of the country, they use Roman script to write, and they have oral tradition and orality in oral form. And when we talk about literature. So Manipur having its own script, and we have seen historians have seen that writing commenced from the 12th century, and the evidence of that is found in the Royal Chronicle, or say what we call the Parol Kumbaba in Manipuri. It is a record of the royal lineage. So that is the beginning of what we find as the first written record of Manipuri literature. So and it recorded that this particular king, Nongda Ladin Pakhamba, was the first king of Manipur, and before that we have again the oral tradition, where all literature in the form of songs, hymns, and stories passed down from generation through the oral tradition and through its religious rituals that were performed. Now, and during this period that I'm talking about, from the 12th century to the early 18th century, the if we look at the society of Manipur, the society, especially the Meitei community, we have like 7 clans that was like in the valley area, and all the 7 clans used to fight for supremacy. And the religion that was followed by the 7 clans, they are more like animistic, worshipping the elements, worshipping nature, worshipping spirits. So that is a kind of religion, traditional religion that the people at that point of time followed. And because they were fighting for supremacy for the this is 7 8 clans, so the cult of heroism is one of the major feature in the poetry of that time. So we see, we look at the poetry, we read the poetry of this time, and you see that the art of warfare, the idea of being a hero, being brave, being courageous, all of that becomes a major part of the poetry of that particular period. And other than that, we have also the myths and the legends, of the gods and goddesses, and especially one ritual that is still performed in Manipur, till now. It is performed for an entire month in the month of summer, June or July, and it celebrates the idea of creation. In every, I think, religion, we have the myths of creation, the gods creating human and all of that. So this particular ritual, it celebrates the myths of creation, and we have a number of poems and number of songs that is sung in this ritual, and it's the source of the most of the modern poetry that we have in Manipur right now. So in that phase, we see cult of heroism, we see religious hymns and songs, and also this particular you know uh, uh, we have this tradition of people going to villages, this wandering bards, and they will just go from one village to the other and sing about these myths and legends, especially of these two god and goddess, god, the male god Mintho and the female god Manthavi, they were a couple. So the wandering bards will go from villages to villages and sing about the reincarnation of these two gods and goddesses. So that is the first phase of the evolution of Manipuri poetry. Then the second phase came in the in the early 18th century, when Hinduism came to Manipur. Now, before that, as I had said earlier, that the religion that was followed in Manipur was more like the worshipping of elements, where they worshipped god, domestic god, and the forest gods. So still it is celebrated till now. So they were the major religious rituals. But from early 18th century, the king of Manipur, he converted to Hinduism, and it is some sort of, say, a political decision that he made. In Before that, before conversion to Hinduism, so Manipur, especially the Meitei clans, the 8 clans used to fight for supremacy, and there was no such thing as the divine right of the king. So with the conversion of the king to Hinduism, he also adopted this idea of the divine right of the king, so that he can, somehow he can control, or he can, he can stick to his power position. So it was a political decision as well. And with the conversion, the king converting to Hinduism, what he did after that was trying to forcefully convert all the people of the Meitei clan to Hinduism. So to ensure that everyone is converted, he collected all these sacred, manuscript of Manipur, and he burned them in front of all the public. And he also banned the the he also banned the rituals that were performed, the earlier ancient faith that people used to follow. All of those were banned, and people who practiced these rituals were punished. So that was the major shift that was happening in the beginning of the 18th century. And if you look at the literature of this period, the major shift happening in the society at one side, and on the other side, we see the translation of Mahabharata and Ramayana in Manipuri at this point of time, and also a process of cultural assimilation taking place. So The royal chronicle of Manipur, which I talked about in the earlier part, which was called the Jaitharo Kumbaba, which talked about the first king of Manipur, it was rewritten. It was rewritten and it was called the Vijay Panchali. Now, according to this royal chronicle, the new royal chronicle written by Santidas Gosai, who came from Sylhet. So he talked about the first king of Manipur as the descendant of Arjuna and a tribal princess Chitrangada. So now the Manipuri people, the Meitei clan, who converted into Hinduism, they are the descendants of the Arjuna of Mahabharata. So we see that a process of cultural simulation taking place. And as I was telling, I was talking about earlier, the god and goddesses that they used to talk about, especially this god Nongpok Ningtho and Panthavi, they were now associated with Shiv and Parvati. So, there is a hill in Manipur where on top of the hill there's a shrine of Nongpok Ningtho, but later on it was converted into Shiv Mandir. So these two gods, being identified as one. And if you look at it, it's a process of erasing the history of the people, the history culture of the people. And another thing that happened at this point of time, is the introduction of Bengali script. So the earlier script that I was talking about, that Manipur has its own, the Meitei clan has its own script. It was banned, it was burned down, and people were forced to learn the Bengali script. So the whole process of Sanskritization of the place, took place during this period of time. And if we look at the poetry of this particular phase, we see, all the the myths and legends that we were talking about, how Hinduism, the myth of or the stories of Hinduism, it seeped into the already existing myths and legends. So this is what one we see in the this particular phase in the evolution of Manipuri poetry when we talk about history of Manipuri poetry. Now, the third phase that I'm going to talk about is the late 19th century when colonialism came to Manipur. So with colonialism, with the British imperialists coming to power, Manipur was defeated in the war in 1891 and it came directly under the British rule. And for 15 years, Manipur was under the direct rule of British imperial power. But after 15 years, Manipur was declared to be a native princely state where an indirect form of government was the indirect administrator, some part of the administration was taken by the British colonizers. So during this phase, the major change that happened in the society was the introduction of the Western education system. So the schools were set up, and yeah, and and the Western philosophy, all of these came to Manipur. Now, with the coming of the school system, when they started the syllabus of the school, they were taught, the Manipuri people were taught Sanskrit or Bengali as the vernacular language. So Manipuri language as literature was not taught. So after the first generation of this, educated academician came into being. So the first batch of this educated people, educated writers, they felt the need for a revival of Manipuri literature because the children are learning Bengali or Sanskrit as a vernacular language. Even with having your own script and a very rich literature, you are studying in your school in the syllabus some other literature or language as your own. So this drive of revival of Manipuri literature, which again is called the Renaissance of we call it that period of time as the Renaissance of Manipuri literature. So most prominently, three writers came into the scene, and they started writing with a new vigor, with such prolific, production of literature, poetry, novels, drama, stories, all of them. But if you look at it, it is highly, if you it was highly idealized form of poetry, romanticized, mostly influenced by the romantic poets, Wordsworth, and also very much influenced by Rabindranath Tagore, if we read some of the poetry of this particular period of time. that is the phase of the Western education that the colonial period brought about in Manipuri literature is the the renaissance of Manipur, or the pioneer of modern Manipuri literature, as what we call today. Sorry about this. So I was thinking that I might read out some of the poems of this period where, uh, as I said, they were highly romanticized and highly patriotic as well. Patriotic because they felt the need to revive Manipuri literature. So one of the poets, Lamabum Kamal, is one of them. There are three poets that in this period we talk about. These three pioneer poets, Lamabum Kamal, Chauba, and Angamal. So Lamabum Kamal, he writes, this is the translation. All these poems, literature that I'm talking about, they are all in translation. When we study, as scholars, we read them in translations. So this is a translation, and I'm going to read out a few lines from this poem. So, where are you, mother, exuding sweet aroma of Ketuki? In your budding time, your boisterous children were frolicking freely. Where are you, mother? So, in most of the poems, we see that the address of Mother Manipur. So, where are you that you have been neglected for so long that now it is the time for the Mother Manipur to be awakened, reawakened. Now, many scholars have talked about, the idea of this renaissance of literature. So, what about the time, before that? So, what is what? And some of the scholars, some of the extreme, scholars have called them the dark ages of Manipur, in terms of literature. But it doesn't mean that there were no literature produced at that point of time. There were many, poetry, literature influenced by Hindu myths and legends, produced at that point of time. So, still a debate, that we call it that the dark age of Indian Manipuri literature, and being called the Renaissance. Maybe calling it Renaissance Manipuri, maybe it can be justified because there is this renewed vigor to revive the lost Manipuri literature. So this is the third phase, and then the fourth phase came with the independence. In 1947, India got its independence, and independence meant a different thing at that point of time in Manipur. If we remember, this was a time when Manipur was not part of India. 1947, when India celebrated freedom, Manipur was also celebrating, freedom from the British, and also they were forming a constitution of its own, where the king was the chairman. Still the king, and the royal family was there. So the king was the chairman, and people from the hills and valleys, representative of the hills and valleys, they formed a council. And it was in 1949 that the then king, went to Shillong, and he was put under house arrest, and the merger agreement was signed. And in October 1949, Manipur became a part of Indian, say the United India. So Indian Union. So part of Indian Union in 1949. Now the problem, that arises from this merger agreement. It's called a dubious merger agreement because none of the council members were, consulted with, because the king went there alone and he signed the merger agreement without consulting any of the council members. So the merger agreement brought a lot of bitterness in the people of Manipur at that point of time, and this is also one of the reasons for the mushrooming of this insurgency groups in Manipur. So it was like a change of the idea of ruler and the rule being changed. So earlier it was the Britishers that were the ruler. Now it was changed to the Indian Union. So that feeling of became, and with that, when Manipur became a part of India, it was given a Part C state. Now Part C state is not a full-fledged state where it was ruled by, or say, governed by a commission. So it was considered to be a stepmotherly treatment. So, and in the literature front, this was happening at the, the political, sphere, political, societal sphere. In the literature, we see that the group of writers that came after the what we call the Renaissance, writers, they were highly romanticized, as I've said earlier. They were highly idealistic, patriotic, but the failure of the state, the failure of the state in providing a stable government with coming with the joining the Indian Union, the failed society. So with during at that point of time, economy had a standstill, and economy did not grow, and there were a number of people who were educated. Education grew, but economy stood still. So this gap in economy and education brought corruption, brought unemployment, nepotism, and all this bitterness in the society. And also at the point of the 1945, we are talking about the World War. We are talking about all this even happening in the world, in the world scenario, that there was no awakening of the people, the consciousness of the people. So they discarded the romantic ideas or romantic way of writing of the the pre-independence poets, and they focus more on realism. They focus more on existence, existence of the common people, and also the question of identity. Now we have seen that during the advent of Vaishnavism, so the sect of Hinduism that came to Manipur, the idea of erasing history was already happening. So the burning of the script, burning of the manuscript of say the literature of the people. So now when we talk about joining the Indian Union, so we also need to talk about the idea of ethnic identity. When so if you are looking at a time when, say, the 1940s, when the entire nation was swept by this idea of nationalism, of the face of nation building, with a shared history, with a shared belief system. The entire northeast was cut off from all this thing that is happening in the mainland India. So cut off geographically, as I said earlier, the entire northeastern part is cut off with a small chicken neck, with joined with a small chicken neck, what we call. So physically, geographically cut off from the mainland area, as well as with the kind of movement that was happening in the other part of India could not reach the northeastern part. Maybe part of that was because of the system that the Britishers had. When they were ruling, they had isolated the entire northeastern area, maybe because they wanted the area to be say free, or maybe conserve their distinct identity, or perhaps it was convenience. It was their convenience, so that they can turn the entire area into Christians for the free Christian missionaries, free freedom for the Christian missionaries to uh, convert it. That was happening at a point of time. Now in Manipur, the Meitei community, obviously they did not convert to Christianity, because the hold of Hinduism was so strong. From that point of time to the king, after the colonial era, the new king, he made sure that Hinduism was strongly rooted, and this was also the time when the Ras Leela also came to existence, which is the classical one of the classical dances of India. So we see that in the post-colonial era, the main problem that began in the 1960s and 70s is the insurgent, the rise of the insurgency group, which gained momentum in the 1980s and the 90s. So it became a very usual or routine thing to talk about violence, to hear about violence, to see or hear death of people. The Manipur was at that point of time run by two parallel governments, the state and the non-state. State, the government, and non-state, the insurgency groups. Now, the insurgency groups also, in the 1980s and 90s, they had a lot of a lot of support from the mass, because of their ideology, or whatever they were demanding for. Again, all this insurgency problem cropping up from the idea of identity as well. To be called, let me briefly tell you, to be called, how to identify yourself with the mainstream, what we call the Indian identity. So one has to give up the ethnic identity. So idea of rearranging identity, adjusting to the new identity, erasing your entire ethnic what is. So the idea of mainstream is very, very say exclusive. It is not inclusive. So all of that brimming up, and then the problem of insurgency already cropping up. And what was the consequence of that? The insurgency and the two parallel governments existing in Manipur, and 1980s and 90s, saw a very violent, phase in Manipuri, in Manipuri society. I might read out some of the historians or some of the academicians who talked about this particular phase. So this is from Sanjay Barua. He says that in Northeast India, it seems the war continues without an end in sight. It is both undeclared and permanent. And arguably, the same is true of Kashmir: attack and defense, oppression and resistance, nation building and separatism, national security and self determination. These wheels turn only to keep the chariot of war moving perpetually onwards. So, what we see in the 1980s and 90s is this perpetual violence. So, you can just wake up in the morning, you take up the newspaper, you read about that violence, all of that, and it is like a normal thing. It how it has become a usual thing. How you have normalized violence or terror at that point of time. But the problem is that this terror that we talk about at this point, which we will see in the later part of the talk when I talk about the contemporary Manipuri poets, how they have, talked about this violence. So the perpetrators are your own people. The terror is within. The terror is the voice of your own people. The terrorists or the insurgents are your own voice. So that kind of complex uh, thing that is happening in the society. So how do the writers, how do the sensitive, say we call the poets as the sensitive people. So how are they trying to talk about that in their poetry, which is again, I will come back to in a very short while. So let me also talk about quote Bhagat Oina, one of the professors from JNU. He talks about violence and the idea of using violence to curb violence. So violence is a means to protest, and as a means to contain such protest has been the inclination of the insurgents and the Indian state. So it is both the state and the non-state that they have resorted to violence to curb or to protest. So this contest was once binary between the Indian state and the insurgents as two opposing camps, but over time the contest have shifted from binary to multi-concerned one. So he's basically talking about how the insurgency groups now it has divided into so many factions. So earlier we used to have like one or two groups, with a certain ideology that they followed. But after a point, I believe that there are more than 50 or maybe more. I'm not very sure. I've lost the count of insurgency groups in Manipur. I'm not talking about the entire northeast part, but only in Manipur there are so many of these factions existing. So and the power struggle. Earlier, the common mass also used to support the insurgency group, but now has come a point where how do you feel safe in Manipur when in the night when you walk out from your house, when you see insurgents or when you see the army, do you feel safe? There is one question. No one feels safe. There is always this, this feeling of suspicion. Who is going to harm the common people? Is in between these two power blocks fighting for whatever their you know whatever their end is. So this is one of the major feature that we see in the contemporary Manipuri poetry. The idea of the imagery of say the blood red, the color red, the color olive, olive signifying the say the uniform of the army or uniform of the insurgents as well. And let me also share some of the some of my personal experiences in growing up in the 90s. 90s, when I was in school, how we were taught, as kids, we were taught to to distinguish the sound of bullets and to distinguish the sound of bullets from crackers. So my father used to teach me, this, if it sounds like this, then it's a cracker, and if it sounds like this, it's a bullet. And when it is a bullet, what you need to do. So the violence was so much, at that point of time in the 90s, that we were told, my father used to tell me, I'm sharing my personal experience. My father used to tell me that if there is a firing happening, then you lie down on the floor, and if you are on the top floor, you run down to the ground floor. So as a kid, those were the things that I learned. And we used to just have dinner, and then we will listen, we will hear some blast or something that happened, and my father would listen to the sound and say, that is some kilometers away from us, so no need to worry. So we had taken that as a normal thing, that that violence, that killing, gun firing, those were normal things. So for the first time when I came to Delhi, or and to Chandigarh to study, and the first time that during Diwali I heard these crackers, I almost go on the ground, because I thought there is some gun firing happening. So how the common people have internalized this violence as part of our lives. So that is what we see in the poetry of the contemporary period. So now let me take you to the 1960s. After the when we're talking about poetry of the 1960s onwards. So there came a group of writers. Named, if I name them, N. Biren, Ibo Bishak, and Ibom. Now Ibo Bishak is also taught in Delhi University. Now another problem which I missed out is that when we talk about the Northeast, so the representative of the Northeast, we do not study, in the school, in the syllabus, there is no place for Northeast. Maybe recently, there has been talk about introducing the history of Northeast as part of the curriculum. Perhaps I don't know how far it has worked out, but literature also, only recently in Delhi University it was introduced. Imbu Bishag is taught in, I think, undergrad. Uh, English honors. I taught it once, I think, or twice. So anyway, what I'm talking about is how it is so alienated. So the idea of this alienation, that never being taught in the, never been part of the mainstream or the mainland India. So now coming to literature, in the 1960s, this a group of writers, these three writers who came and challenged the norms of the idea of the aesthetics of poetry that the romantic the pre-independence romantic Manipuri poets were writing. So they call them escapists, that they are escaping from their reality, and they started writing about the realist poetry, the idea, where they challenge the traditional aesthetic, whatever we call in poetry, the aesthetics of poetry. So some of the critics have even talked about this group of poets as how they have written. Poetry is not supposed to be something that you vomit out. The poetry of this new group of writers, they are just vomiting what they see. So that is not poetry. And also there's debate on the aesthetics of these writers as well. So but these three writers, one of them, two of them, I was fortunate enough to meet and interview them. So one of these writers, Ibomcha, Ibomcha is also a Sahitya Academy Award recipient, and both of them, Ibo Bishop also Sahitya Academy Award recipient. So when I went to meet Ibomcha, and he writes about all this violence that we talk about, all this the imagery of blood, imagery of death, color red, color olive, all of this he talks about that. But when I met him and I asked him, and there's also a kind of humor in his poem, so how he has made this entire absurd situation into something humorous. Or he wrote in one of the poems, let me read out one of his poems. Uh, he says that whether bomb burst or not burst, beautiful women will walk and men will watch. Even ugly men will watch women. Even if there is encounter or no encounter, even there is death, no death, then men will look at women. So how he has taken, such, bomb blast, people dying, and then a normal behavior, women walking and men watching them. And then he also talks about how these men will come to a hotel and talk about the new movies, new actresses, and then they will go home. And they will also talk about, in the same breath they will talk about the actresses, as well as how many people died that day, from encounter. So mixing up of this ordinary and what is not ordinary, people dying every day is not ordinary. So how he has brought some sort of humor in his poem, that is one uh, of the special talent of this writer. In another poem, he writes, let me read out a few stanza from this poem. This is of a dream. Pardon me, was someone saying something? No, no. Oh, okay, so let me read this poem. This is called Story of a Dream. So he says, who else would dream such a dream? I was having a dream, a very pleasant one. It began almost like a nightmare. It was our home, quite dark inside. On the floor, their entrails spilling, bodies of children lay about like rats run over by vehicles. I trod cautiously, taking long steps, but walking on running blood. My soles were sticky anyway. Then he continues, the poem, that he is walking in this nightmare and suddenly people are pointing guns at him. That there's a gun on his cheek, and when he shot, the person shot him, instead of a bullet, it was a grape that came to his mouth. So he says that, let me, then if it is like this, then shoot me, shoot more bullets at me. And this is a dream where all the bullets are turning into flowers and fruits. And he says, if this is how it is, then let there be all this gunfire. So one time I met him, and I talked to him, why, he is an engineer by profession, and he writes, poetry, also columns in Manipuri dailies. So I talked to him and I asked him, why is this, so I talked to him that surreal, imagery as a literature student. I asked him all that, and he said, I don't know about all those surrealism and all that, but for me, the reality is a dream. We are living a dream. We are living in a nightmare. That is why I'm writing about this nightmare. I don't know about your surrealism. So, another thing that we notice in the writers of the Northeast is that, they are very much unaffected by all these isms, theories that, as a literature student we talk about. They are just writing their existence, their absurd, existence. So that is one thing that, highly, made me think about, how these things are. Then another poet, Tansu Bigovichaki, as I said earlier, he's also part of the. I'm sorry, let me just charge my laptop. Just give me a moment. It's running out of battery. So sorry. Just give me a moment. So sorry about that. So Tanzam Ibubushak again, he is another poet where he talks about, he says that, poetry should not be there to teach people. Poetry should not be there to change the society. But if you look at his poetry, he talks about, the ills of the society. He talks about how, he talks about the silence. So, another theme that, I want to mention of the contemporary Manipuri poetry is the silence. In the silence of the people, during this tussle of power between the state and the non-state. So one should remain silent. But then he also writes about how long can we stay silent. So he writes a poem called Volcano, where he says, volcano do not erupt, lava just stay sleep, asleep, do not erupt. But then he talks, later on at the end of the poem, he says, but one day this volcano is going to erupt. One day this lava will come out. So, he talks about, very initially, in the early 80s, and he used to write very bold, very angry poems. But later on, in the, later poems that he wrote in the 2000, and, after that, he has somehow, matured, his thought, the angry, say, bellows, has turned into a more mature philosophical poetry. So, let me also read out one of his poems, about poem. The title of the poem itself is Poem, where he talks about silence. And he says, in this land today, one cannot speak aloud, one cannot think openly. Hence, poem, like a flower, I play with you. Before my eyes, incident follows every other incident. Incredulous, hair raising, walking yet sleeping, eyes open but dreaming, standing yet seeing nightmares. In dreams, in reality, only terrifying, hair rising instances. So around me, closing eyes, palms on ears, molding the heart to a mere clay object, I write poems about flowers. In this land today, one should only think of flowers, dream about flowers for my small baby, my wife, for my job, to protect myself from harm. So he talks about how we should treat, he's only writing poem about flower. He's not going to talk about anything else because he has to think about his wife, his child, and his job. So silence, and he's talking about how do you stay, you have to stay silent in such a world. So there was one, scholar who asked, how is it different? The poetry that is being written in Manipur, about violence. Other people also are writing about violence. So how is it different? So he answered that, in Manipur, we are writing with a gun pointed at our temple. So this poet, Ipopishak, when I went to interview him, he said, he literally got bullets as warning from the insurgents for writing about, writing against them, writing against their ideology or their philosophy. He receives literally the bullets as a warning. So in another poem, he writes, I want to be killed by an Indian bullet. So therein he talks about the insurgents, or the other party, the powerful people, as the elements, the five elements. And he says that, they come to kill me. So if I have to be killed, then kill me with an Indian bullet. So there is one of the poem, I think, also prescribed in Delhi University. So I have many other poems and poets to talk about, but I think I'm also running out of time. So before closing, let me also tell you briefly about Manipuri women poets, and I'm not talk about Manipuri women poets because if you look at Manipur or the northeastern part of the country, we see that women are more empowered. That in Manipur we have a market only run by women. Only women are doing all the business there. It has been there for many years. So no men are there. And then women also come out in the night to protect the locality. So we have sets of locality, and it is the women who has taken the charge of protecting the locality. So they will punish people who are drunk. They will punish people who are stealing or any kind of thing. So they will literally come out with torches, torch in their hand, and they are called as torch bearers. And these torch bearers, if you remember, I think this was in 2004 and 5, when one of the women, one of the women was killed, and there was a lot of thing that happened. This 14, 18, torch bearer women, they came out, and then they stripped naked in front of the Indian army, and they had this banner saying that Indian army rape us, because one of the woman was, so then maybe not, I'm not very sure about that. So the women are very in our society, women plays a very big, huge role in our society. But it is not as if women are free. Women are still exploited. Women are still suppressed at the level of family. At the society level, they will come forward, protect the family, protect the society. But you go home, and then again the same discrimination that happened to serve the husband and all that also exists. So it's kind of a paradoxical situation there. So about women writers, women writers came very late in the scene because women were not allowed to get education. Education, going to school was considered as something impure. Women who would go to school were considered impure women. So the first batch of women, one of the first women to get education was the princess. The princess herself. The royal princess. So we also have women writers, and if you remember, Sharmila, who also fasted for more than 15 years. So she herself is a poet, and women are also writing about terror, violence. Women are writing about romance. They are writing about myths and legends. So, I thought, I will also talk a little bit on women writers. And let me conclude this talk by reading out a poem by, uh, uh, you know, Sharmila, Sharmila. So, just give me a moment. Yeah, so this is a poem that Shorisi wrote about, being in this captivity that, she felt, she was there. So, she says, free my feet like bangles made of thorn, confined inside a narrow room. My fault lies in being incarnated as a bird. Inside the dark room of prison, many voices echo around, and like the sound of birds, not the merry laughter, not that of a lullaby, let the gate of prison be flung wide. I will not go on another path. Please remove the shackles of thorn. Let me be not accused for being incarnated in the life of a bird. So I will conclude my talk here. I hope I covered up some of the part.
Thank you so much, ma'am. No doubt that talk was interesting and fruitful. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Anupma, you really took us to a new world of poetry that is Manipuri. Yes, you took us to the world of Northeastern. It's very interesting, with interesting history, geography, and you started with the explanation. You took us to the geography, how it started with the intro giving, like you follow the Methi community is there. That's important. People follow there. The evolution you talked about poetry and the literature. I think literature started only in 10th century only, but it was oral literature as you also focused on. So that was beautiful to know. I think the audience definitely they must be delighted by your talk. And then you focused on the seven clans fighting for supremacy, and there was emergence of Hinduism, then the conversion, and then the kingship politics there, and then you came to the third phase that was the late 19th century, which talked of colonialism as it normally happens around the world. It was not only the Northeast was impacted by that. Yeah, the special thing which I noticed in this Manipuri literature was your word, the Indian bullet. That is really to be very most stories. Since it is not it is not presented the word, it gave the Indian we are seeing that Indian is in very it's wonderful. And very congratulations to you, ma'am. Great. Applause.
Thank you, Palmam, for your insightful comments. And I must say that it was a very interesting and insightful session.
Yeah, and even the women writers you quoted, they were also quite interested too. I think one should read. And yes, it should be prescribed specifically in the mainstream with the university syllabus also. And I guess with the implication of this, implementation of NEP, this would be done by the central universities. Possibly, hope for the best.
Ma'am, shall we do the question and session?
Yeah, please. Do we have questions? We should really get get them answered.
Okay, before moving on to the question of the session, I shall request to all the participants to post their questions in the chat box. In the meanwhile, I will read one of the questions which has been asked by Pushpa ma'am. Pushpa ma'am has asked that if the literature is a reflection of life in a society, I would like to know one good example from Manipuri literature of the influence of literature on society that could have brought out a harmonious change in the life of the people for a better tomorrow.
Yeah, I think Anupma ma'am needs.
Shall I answer this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me read. So, if literature is a reflection of life in a society, I would like to know one good example of literature of the influence of literature on society that could have brought out harmony in the life of people for a better tomorrow. So, I think I agree with what what Upshad says about literature and society. Obviously, no doubt that literature is a reflection of life in society. During the course of my talk, I talked about how the society, the change in the society brought about a change in the shift that I was talking about. Was because of the change in the society. So, it is a reflection of the society. But again, what is the role of poetry, say, or literature? So, are we writing to change the society? I mean, if we are looking at, say, I was reading Dalit literature, so Dalit literature, specifically talk about changing the society. Their purpose is to change the society. Their purpose is to look at the, writing, is a weapon for them. So no doubt, that is also there. But in Manipuri literature also, I mean, obviously we are getting to know about this, existence of these two power blocks that I was talking about through poetry. That is the change that we see that other people are also getting to know about the condition of the people. But at the same time, what Vishal said, that poetry should be there. If you look at poetry to change the society, I mean, these are two contradictory things, the Dalit literature that I was talking about, and what this writer, Igokushag, is saying, that we write literature. Literature is, art, poetry is art. He's a poet. He says, my poetry is art. I have nothing to do with the society. I am writing about the society, but it should not be, that my poetry is going to change the society. It is not going to change it, and this is a fact. Maybe we will become more aware, and so that is what he said. And to me, I think what we see in literature, maybe we will not see in history book, or what we will not see in other, say, other, what is in the, truly, what we are going through, from personal level, we see, the thing. So, I mean, when if you're talking about example, so example of Manipuri literature, influence of on society. So I am not sure if it can bring any harmonious change, since the way things are in Manipur. I mean, in the 2020s and sorry, 2010s, things are a little bit better. What what I have,
No, I
what
think,
I
I think the
experienced.
question, yeah, I think the participant wanted to know if there is any text line there to support your right. Any Manipuri text which says that. If you can put any text.
Yes, ma'am, I'm not able to hear you properly.
Get the question. In fact, I'm not able to read it. Where is it? Mayan, can you read the question? Or is it answered? I don't know who asked that. I don't see the question.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, so ma'am, if you can ask this.
Yes, my question was like, I wanted to know from Manipuri literature whether any piece of writing that has brought about a change in the life of the people, any one example, so that literature is a powerful influence that can bring about a harmonious change in the society. I wanted to know because Manipuri literature is something very new to me, so I just wanted to know any more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, the change is that we are able to, I mean, see change as in I mean, I cannot see a drastic change, but awareness, I think, is one of the thing that not only for the people of Manipur, but sorry about that. Not only for the people of Manipur, but what is happening in Manipur, other people from outside Manipur, are able to see or look, say for example through this talk, and when I'm talking about, when I'm reading out this poem, we can see, what is happening there. So maybe that will bring about a change in the outlook of people. Say for example, why so much violence happening there? What is the cause of that? That kind of understanding can be, I think, brought about by, say, exploring more into, this poetry. And also, obviously there are other forms of literature as well, stories. If you look at plays, dramas, that's been written and performed. So, I think, there is also always, some change that, I mean, even if the writer does not mean to, talk about only change from their work, the reader, or the people, the audience, it's up to them to, I think,
Yeah,
see that.
but it is a society
I'm not sure about
yeah, it was a society where people were experiencing violence and things of that kind. So any powerful writing in literature that has brought about good change in the people, because these mindset and their attitude and their thought process or whatever, that has really helped them to build a developing and a healthy society. I mean that way. I mean to say.
Any contemporary
yeah,
writer talks about that change.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand what you was asking. What the change, but frankly, how much can be, how much can literature bring about a change in society? That is one thing that I frankly cannot, I mean, understand. I mean, I cannot tell you, how much can it bring, for a better tomorrow. What is the role of literature in that? How much can literature do? So that I myself am not sure about, that. That's why I was,
Thank you, ma'am. It's an open thing, like all of us can research into it. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. It was indeed insightful and interactive session. Thank you, Nupma ma'am, for joining the session. Thank you, Paul ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I invite Dr. Vishakha ma'am to carry over the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Nupma ma'am. It was indeed an enlightening session. Am I audible?
Yeah, yeah, yes, ma'am. Yeah.
May I request Dr. Ghanshyam sir to kindly announce the certificates in today's event? Dr. Ghanshyam sir, kindly announce the certificates.
Don't know if that is there or not. Actually,
Okay, may I invite Shalini ma'am, please announce the certificates for today's event.
okay, first of all, I would like to congratulate on really a very nice session, giving us new areas of research related to Manipuri poetry, Manipuri literature. Then I would be asking you in detail about the text related to literature, so that
Might mute yourself better because there is a lot of sound.
yes, Mayank, keep yourself mute, so that we can even give our students also these research topics related to Manipuri literature. And secondly, I would like to thank all the executive members present over here, and I would like to thank Parul ma'am to chair the session, and I would like to thank Mayank also to to play the role of anchor, conduct successful, and to coordinate. Vishakha ma'am, this is a wonderful job you have done. And now I would
Thank you.
like is okay. Just let me check. I think sir is not there. Sir has left. So okay, Okay, let me share my screen to present the certificates. Yes, is the screen visible now with certificates, Mayank?
No, ma'am.
No? Anybody?
I'm not visible.
Shaka ma'am, is it not visible?
Not visible, ma'am.
Oh, I'll just try it again.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible now.
Okay, it's visible now. So this is the logo of our forum, and this certificate goes to Dr. Anupma ma'am for sharing her expertise as a keynote speaker in the seminar on the topic literature and society and overview of Manipuri poetry. Ma'am, we are really delighted to listen to you, and you were not even feeling well. You had cold and cough, and after that you were speaking so you can say with power and so much concentration. That was really nice, and so much dedication. I really I was feeling like that to give you a cup of coffee that time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the thought.
Uh, next, this is for Dr. Parul Mishra ma'am. It is a matter of great pleasure to give you a certificate here and to meet you on this online platform. You have cleared the session in a very good way. The next certificate goes to Mayank. Mayank, you have contributed as the master of ceremonies, and you really did a very good job. So
Thank you.
I would like to thank everybody present here.
Thank you, iSPELL, for giving us this opportunity to share our thoughts on a really, a new literature. It is actually new literature to research on. Very true that was.
Yes, okay. Now I think we can end the meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.